So anyway, we had in our last conference in Lake Lure, I dealt with something that had it corresponded with the study I've been on, of course, on Wednesday nights, and looking at the thought of, we can just read the verse just to get everybody on the same page here. Galatians chapter 4, this is verse 9. But now, after that you have known God, or rather, are known of God, how turn you again to the weak and beggarly elements, whereunto you desire again to be in bondage? And when I began the classes on Wednesday nights, I kind of gave it a subtitle of Known of God, but the subtitle was Salvation in the Context of an Eternal Covenant. And I haven't, I've looked a little, and we'll go back to something I did deal with about the covenant, but it's very important that we understand that our salvation is always based upon, is established upon the fact that there is an eternal covenant. See, we think when we're born again, whatever terminology you want to use, we come to Christ, or Christ comes and lives in us. We believe that God makes a covenant with us individually. We believe that God finally begins to relate to me. And he does, but it's in a very specific way. And Paul beautifully orchestrates his words are always just beautifully stated, because he's emphasizing something. He's making a distinction between the security of our knowing of God versus the certainty of our being known of God. There's a difference to that. My salvation for many years rested upon how well I was knowing God. How well my relationship, or my assumed relationship was going. How I believed my relationship with God was progressing. Did I pray enough? Did I do enough good stuff? Did I do as little bad stuff as possible? And all of the things. There are always questions, always assumptions, and I always hear these preachers say, when you go home at night, you always pray, Lord, forgive me for the things I didn't do right, and forgive me for the things and it's always those questions, and that's because we don't understand the certainty of the covenant. We don't understand how sure the very reality of being known of God truly is. We rest everything, the weight of everything rests for us in our mind upon our knowing of Him. How well do you know God? How well are you knowing God? Are you doing everything you can to know Him in the particular way? And although that knowing of God is very important, because that's how my soul becomes a participant and a partaker of the salvation God has provided. However, until God's knowing of us is seen to be the basis and the true foundation upon which we stand, our knowing of God is going to be upon some false basis, some false premise. It's going to be upon me. It's going to have me as its center, and it doesn't. God's knowing has never had me or you as its center, as its object. God's knowing is eternally fixed in the face, in the person of His Son. And the covenant that He has given us, and it is said beautifully in Isaiah 49. He says it this way. He's speaking to Christ in a prophetic way. You can see it if you read 49, it's beautiful, because it begins by a very controversial part of the verses. When you read commentaries, is when it's he says, I've sent thee to gather Israel, to gather Jacob unto me. And he says, yet though Israel be not gathered, Yet I, then here's the part that gets it. Yet I stand glorious in his sight. Now, it always threw me because when you read commentaries about that, and there's debate between commentaries of how that verse should be worded, because they read it as if it's saying the Messiah has failed in his journey, that he fell short of what he was supposed to do. And guess what? Today, we think the same thing. Certain theologies believe the same thing. He failed. He has to come back to fulfill it. He failed his first time. No, he didn't fail. And what he did was, and what Isaiah is saying there is, though natural Israel, the natural Jews would not be gathered to him. Remember, he came and he said, how often I would have gathered you unto me, but you would not. Isaiah in chapter 11 also talks about that God would raise up the root of Jesse, and that root of Jesse would be an ensign or a standard to which all the Gentiles and Israel would be gathered. And that ensign is when they would gather around the tabernacle, they had their standards. Each tribe had their own standard. And you can go to, I think it's Numbers chapter 2 to talk about that, but each one had their own standard, and there were 4 major standards. And if you look at Ezekiel and you see the 4 faces in Ezekiel, you'll realize that the standards of the main 4 were the faces. Those faces were on the 4 major standards in Ezekiel. He was seeing the encampment of Israel. And he was bringing God's view of Israel back to a people in captivity, and showing them the certainty of God's view of them. Although they be in captivity, although they be scattered, all of the things, God's view never changed. And I've said many times that during this study, that when they went into the wilderness, and I'll get to something I promise in a moment. When they went into the wilderness, and basically just in disobedience, and a whole generation died in the wilderness. In God's view, Israel was never touched. Israel was never diminished. A whole generation dies, yet Israel stood completely untouched by that, as far as God sees. Now, we see a bunch of dead people in the wilderness. God sees Israel standing before him, because Israel is this, Isaiah. They would not come to me and be gathered to their true ensign, their true gathering place, yet I stand glorious in his sight. He's defining Israel gathered. I am glorious in his sight. The people coming to him did not make Israel Israel. He stood glorious in the sight of God as the Israel of God. Remember, Israel means the prince with God. It's Christ. Paul never, in his declaration of who is the true Israel of God, and you see it in Galatians, and that's the thing he's trying to correct with them as well. He never says it's not this group of people, it's this group of people. He says it's not many, it is the seed who is Christ. That's the one to whom the promises were made. That's the one with whom the covenant was cut. Israel is my son. Exodus 4. And what I'm trying to show you in those things is that God's view of Israel has never wavered. God's view, God's knowing, God's understanding, whether they were disobedient or obedient, God's view was never changed by their obedience or disobedience. Well, I'm thinking of whether to do something, but I won't right now. Now, you see the same thing. Though Israel be not gathered, yet I stand glorious. And as I said, he's declaring himself to be the Israel of God. Remember when he says he came to his own, and his own received him not. Remember that. The word in the Greek, when you read it in the literal translation, it would say he came to his own things as the heir. He came to the things that belonged to him by inheritance, that he had right to. And those who were his by inheritance rejected him. They would not receive him. But it didn't stop the plan of God. Why? Because their receiving of him did not determine anything. It determined their participation in the covenant, but it never determined the validity of the covenant. And it never determined the validity of the promises, because the promises were never contingent upon them receiving him. It was always him. It was always about him. He was the focus of it. He was always eternally the object of it. And that's the thing. Even our concept of an old and a new covenant is off. I thought for years, old and new covenant, two covenants. No. Never has there been two covenants. God has never had two covenants. God has had one. And Paul says it beautifully when he talks about, Jimmy, what color? I think this does it. It shows up a little better. Good, thank you. Remember, hey, that's it. I misspelled that in Tazewell. And I said, what I meant is, it is real. But anyway, Paul says it this way. They were kept. They were kept. Don't be talking about me. I hear you. There's a tag, isn't there? That's all right. I'm fine. I won't turn around again. I'll just do this. Anyway, he says they were kept by the law. The word kept there actually means a protective custody. And this is what I want us to understand. When we think of an old and a new covenant, we have to understand that God did not say, okay, I'm done with that covenant, now I've got to make this one. He had already, and we're going to look at a covenant that he made with Abraham and show, and what I want to look at, the covenant he made with Abraham, and then show what Jesus actually came and offered to the people who boasted to be the sons of Abraham. He came offering them something, but they didn't appreciate how he offered it. Just like we don't. And we'll see how that we don't appreciate it either if we see it as it is. But anyway, God had made this covenant. Well, before we go there, let's go ahead and do that. The covenant with Abraham, this will make sense, a little more sense. We all know the covenant he made with Abraham, it starts, well, it doesn't start, but it really is demonstrated in chapter 15 of Genesis. I'm jumping around. I got so many things in my mind. I'm sorry. But Abraham begins to ask him, God tells him all of the things that are going to happen and going to come based upon the seed and the land and all of that. And Abraham has one simple question. How? I don't have a seed. I don't have an heir. How is all of this going to happen? And so and God, tells him all of this. And then in verse 8 he says, Lord God Almighty, or Lord God, whereby shall I know that I shall inherit it? How will I know all of this is going to happen? And when I used to read this, it was like, this is a non-answer. It's not an answer, but it is the answer. He tells him, take a heifer of 3 years old, a she-goat of 3 years old, a ram of 3 years old, and a turtle dove and a young pigeon. And he took unto him all these and divided them in the midst and laid each piece one against another. But the birds he divided he not. Now, we just show it. Here's all of these animals, and they're in this type of an order. I would do like Daniel and make it real pretty, but he'd have all the blood. It'd be looking good. But here's how the animals were set in order, okay? And this is the answer to how will this be. Because he's about to show him that there is something that's not contingent upon Abraham here. And that's the thing we can't get through our head. the answer to the questions we have is always found in something that's secured in something other than us. It's not secured in us. Now, so he tells him to do this, and here's the vision. And Brother Lumen and I have been discussing this some, and he said that there's commentaries, and I read them too, that said that this vision that he's about to have is actually an inward revelation, and it's an inward vision, which makes it very significant for us. It's something that he sees inwardly. So here's Abraham over here having this vision, and now he's set this in order, and darkness has fell upon him, and he is seeing this happen. What he sees now is a pot of fire, this pot of fire, and there's this torch that's also burning, and he sees them walk together through these animals. And to me now, this is a beautiful picture of the Father and the Son cutting covenant with one another. A covenant that Abraham has no active part in as far as establishing it. It does not rest upon Abraham at all. It is always God saying, there was no greater to swear by, so I swore by myself. It is God making covenant with himself, because that's the only covenant that stands. This is Abraham's covenant, but it's not really God making a covenant with Abraham. It's God making a covenant between himself, him, Father and Son, a covenant God, making covenant, confirming, cutting, ratifying a covenant, because this is how they did it. This is how you cut a covenant then. And then it says, after he sees this, and that same day God made covenant with Abraham. What he did was he brings Abraham into this covenant. There are so many times where God will say in the Old Testament, we'll read it, where he'll say, I will make my covenant with you. He doesn't say, I will make a covenant with you. He says, I will make my covenant with you. Saying, I already have a covenant and I'm going to bring you into it. See, and that's the thing that just throws us off. I wrote something on Facebook that had a lot of people discussing on little separate discussions. Made some people mad, made some people happy. But it was about this. It was about you are not the object of God's view. You are not the center of God's view. If you think you are, everything weighs on you. And I've been in that. That's torture. That is not good. Okay? But when you see there's a covenant that's established before he's brought into it, there's joy there. There is nothing but peace in that. When you understand that there is an established, ratified, perfect covenant before Abraham's even brought to it. And all God wanted was a man who would walk by faith in a covenant that was already established. Now, we know in chapter 16, he's faced with a pretty bad situation. And it starts off in a bad way. He sees all that in chapter 15. But chapter 16 starts out, his wife was barren. Now all of this is a promise, and then the very first verse of the next chapter says, and Sarah gave him no children, and she was barren, but he had a handmaid. And I thought, man, that is the test of faith, isn't it? See, the test of faith isn't when you leave here, you're going to go out and get drunk. That's what we think. Can I not do bad stuff for a week? That's the test. That's not the test. The test is, will you attempt to fix or override your nothingness, your insufficiency in some way? Or will you rest, I wrote here, or will you rest assured and certain with all confidence in his allness, in his sufficiency? That's the test. Will you walk knowing it is not I, but Christ who lives in me? Or will you somehow try to bring yourself into this covenant? This covenant doesn't permit any but this. It's exclusive to the Father and the Son. Now, we can pull out, and I'll get to this, but we can pull out all of these verses where it talks about the exclusivity of this relationship. No man knows the Father save the Son, and no man knows the Son save the Father. That's pretty exclusive. I would say that was a closed door to anyone else. Thankfully, he is the door into such a covenant. But that door has blood on it. And I've been talking about that, the propitiation for some time. The door into a relationship. And also, when he offers himself as the door in John chapter 10. In John chapter 10, verse 15, after he talks about himself as the door, he says, as the Father knows me, even so know I the Father, and I lay down my life for the sheep. Now, I have been, listing those three phrases as just 1, 2, 3. As the Father knows me, so know I the Father, and I lay down my life. Okay? And the thing I've been seeing in this was a pretty powerful, beautiful order. And it has everything to do with this. It has everything to do with this that we'll get to. But this is how we're brought into it in the reality of the cross. Here, we see first an established relationship, which is what a covenant is. It's an established relationship. And it's something that is perfect. There's no third party in this. No one there to mess it up. I know my Father, and in that same, the Father knows me in that same way I know him. There is a perfect relationship established before this happens. I lay down my life for the sheep. Before he goes to the cross, there is a perfect relationship already. That makes me happy because that lets me know I didn't add to anything when I came to the picture. It was a masterpiece before I was brought to it. God was happy and satisfied without me involved in it. The grace of God is that he has allowed me to partake of it. But most of us, when we see that, and what that really means, we see that in the context of the door and the truth of the covenant, we don't appreciate that. We say, well, what about me? There's this what about me theology now. And most churches do cater to the what about me crowd. Of course it's about you. No, it's always been about him. It's about the Father being satisfied in his Son and God, by his grace, allowing us a door into that satisfaction. And when you look at the word propitiation, and this goes, there's a lot of ground that has to be laid for that, but in Romans 3, he's talking about those who fall short of the glory, and all men. He didn't make distinction. He's saying whether you're Jew or Gentile. I know the Jews want to say because they're under the law, they have some advantage. But he says, what advantage do we truly have? All have sinned. The law actually exposes us as sinners. And then he gives this description of mankind, Jew or Gentile. And I told him in Tazewell, I was talking about that in Tazewell, and I said, you'll never find this in any daily devotional at all. Ever. There is none righteous, none holy, none that seek after God. I mean, the poison of asp is under their tongue. I mean, that's pretty rough, and you're not going to find that in the affirmation today, being affirmed. He's affirming you. He's affirming you. He's affirming what you are by nature. So he's going to show how the door deals with that. So he talks about him finally, in the fullness of time, coming and how does he say, showing forth the propitiation, which is very different. Because propitiation, when you go to the hilasterion in the Greek, you go to the Old Testament, in the Hebrew, it refers to the mercy seat in the tabernacle, in the Holy of Holies, on the Ark of the Covenant. It's the mercy seat. So God shows forth his mercy seat. It's not blood, see, not the stigmata. He shows forth the mercy seat. One of the commentaries said that's very different because under the old it was hidden. Now he shows it forth. It's unveiled. And so he says, so that he may be righteous, or be seen to be the righteous one, and be the righteousness of those who believe. And in the context of all of that, Paul asks this question after he pretty well says, you are not it. He's everything. When you look at the word propitiation that he says, he sets forth there, him as a propitiation. The Weiss commentary says the best rendering of that word, as far as a definition, is the place of God's satisfaction. He says in the Old Testament, he says, it is there that I will meet with you. On the mercy seat. I will meet with you there. That is God saying, I will meet with you only in the place where I'm satisfied. Does that that makes sense to me. Because God is satisfied in the fact that he has put away everything that falls short of his glory, everything that falls short of him, that is contrary to this relationship. So nothing else stands except this. And then he offers his Son as his own eternal satisfaction to be the door for us to come into it. But that door is not the opening for every single individual on the face of the earth to come in and have their own relationship or their own covenant with God. God has brought into, and see, that's the thing that I've been correcting a lot lately. We say he's brought us into it. I think it's better to be said he has brought it into us. Because I can say, well, he's brought me into Christ, and we can say, okay, yeah, he's brought us all into Christ. So you have in Christ, you have all these little individuals. I'm there, you're there. I think the more perfect and more accurate way of saying it is that God has not opened his covenant up to everyone, to many, not many, but to thy seed who is Christ. He's not opened that covenant up to many. He has offered that one covenant and made that one covenant in the person of his Son to dwell in many. One covenant in many. One relationship in many. Not many having their relationship. Now that clarifies a lot of stuff for me. I mean, what it does is give me a sure ground to stand on. It gives me something real to stand on. It's like Paul. Paul corrects it and says, after that you have known God. And then he says, no, rather, instead of that, are known of God. Because he knows the weight of it has to be upon an eternal reality. Something eternal, something sure, not the inconsistencies of my up and down knowing of God, and it's good today and it's not good tomorrow. No, it has to be resting upon the absoluteness of an eternal reality that is established here. I know him, he knows me. And now I laid down my life that you may come into it. Or that I may bring it into you. That you may have this covenant, this relationship as your relationship with God. Now, I've said many times, in the tabernacle, you see it. They didn't have, everybody had their own Ark of the Covenant and their own altar and their own this and their own that. You didn't hire your own personal high priest. Everyone had to come to that one central object to participate in the relationship God had set in their midst. And we know that when Korah bucked that, and all the 250 that were with him, and he said, no, we're all holy here. Who do you think you are? He's going against the high priest here. Who do you think you are? We're all holy here. So they said, well, I'll tell you what. We're all 250 of you, bring your censers, and you can stand before God, and Aaron will stand before God with his censer, and we know what happened. God swallowed them up, 250 men, swallowed them up in the earth, and consumed them with fire. Now, what is God trying to establish there? Only one stands before me. Only one is your relationship with me. You have no relationship outside of this one. And the moment you try to set yourself in that position, death is the result, always. Separation is the result. Because I'm trying to experience something of spiritual reality separate from the person of spiritual reality. Separate from Him. Separate from the relationship God has set in my midst. And for so many years, and many times now, I try to relate to God contrary to the only relationship He has with me. Because I'm ignorant of the covenant. I'm ignorant of the one who is. I was saying a while ago, Isaiah 49. He says to the one who was to gather Israel, He says, I will preserve you and I shall give you as the covenant. Not I will, give you the ability to make a covenant. No, I'll give you as the covenant. You will be the covenant I make with them. And Again, this has everything to do with this. When we say old and new, we have to understand when you had, as Paul again says, Israel was kept by the law until faith should come. He's talking about the faith of Abraham. Until the faith, this reality would come in its fullness. The seed to whom this covenant was made, to whom the promises were made, with whom this covenant was cut, until He came, they were kept under the law. But the word, again, doesn't mean condemned. It means to be in protective custody. They were kept under the blanket, if you want to say it this way, they were covered with Christ. They were clothed with Christ. So you have feasts and you have offerings, and that's part of, I don't know if I spelled that right. Then you have the priests and all of the things, this part of the law, part of that system. It was not to add to anything or take away from this. Paul says it could not. Something that came 430 years later could not nullify the covenant that was confirmed of God in Christ. That's a picture of the covenant confirmed of God in Christ. This didn't nullify it. This protected the covenant or protected the promises until the seed to whom it was made would come and receive it to himself. I totally confused everybody. I confused me. No. But that was what it was about. It protected and preserved the promise, the covenant. It protected it for the seed to whom it belonged. So when he comes and says, and that's what I want to talk about, God did not make a different covenant. He confirmed this covenant. Now, Paul says in Romans, I think it's Romans 9, and we can go into every one of these, but I want to just focus on the one word or the one phrase. Paul laments over the Israelites, his natural brethren. And he laments over them because they have not come to Christ. Verse 4 says, who are Israelites? Well, let me read verse 2. That I have great heaviness, continual sorrow in my heart, for I would wish myself were accursed from Christ for my brethren, my kinsmen according to the flesh, who are the Israelites, to whom pertains the adoption, the glory, the covenants. See, all of these things that they were under the covering of the law, under the protective custody of the law. All of these things were promised to Israel. But remember, Israel is my son. You can never forget that. We've forgotten that. Israel is my son. We've totally forgot that today. But God didn't forget. So, all of the things pertain to them. Now, so he goes on and he says they pertain to them. The adoption, the glory, and the covenants. The giving of the law, the service of God, the promises. Whose are the fathers, and of whom, as concerning the flesh, Christ came. So I want to focus just on this thought about the covenant. Now, here in Romans, it's plural, right? Covenants. I was reading commentaries because that threw me for a while, of it being plural. But they said that it was because of all of the renewals of that one covenant, of this covenant. God renewed it. Remember, every time God dealt with a man, he dealt under covenant. He made a covenant. Noah, Moses, it was always with a covenant in mind because it all pointed to this. It all pointed to covenant. To this relationship we now have, the covenant that is in us. And that God has provided our souls. But he says covenants. And I was reading a verse here, and I think it beautifully illustrates this. This is in 1 Chronicles chapter 16, verses 15 through 18. I didn't write down what, I know this isn't the King James, but I didn't write down what translation I got it from. Anyway, but it says this, be ye mindful always of his covenant. In some translations it says, he is mindful always of his covenant. And I like that better. But, okay, be ye mindful, or he is mindful always of his covenant, the word which he commanded to 1,000 generations. That's a way of saying forever. We got people now counting them, seeing how far we got. Which he made with Abraham, bringing it back to this. The covenant, the word he commanded to 1,000 generations, which he made with Abraham, his oath to Isaac, and that he also confirmed to Jacob for a statute to Israel as an everlasting covenant, saying, I will give this land of Canaan as the portion of your inheritance. That was all here. That's where this started. And he always just continued to renew that covenant with those who would come. Now, what does that matter? Well, Paul laments over the fact that they're missing the covenant. They're missing everything that pertained to them. So what I want to look at, and I hope this makes sense to you, is what did he offer when he came? Remember, he's the one that cut this. He's the seed with whom it was made, the covenant. What did he come offering? Malachi calls him the messenger of the covenant, right? Daniel says he will come and he shall confirm the covenant. Now that's in the whole context that most dispensationalists today talk about the 70th weeks of Daniel, and they say there's 1 week missing and we don't know where the week is, and one day that week's going to finally be fulfilled. Well, it all has to do with this. It has to do with him coming and confirming the covenant. But see, when I used to read that about him coming as the messenger to confirm the covenant, I always thought he was coming to the Jews and saying to the Jews, hey, all of this is yours. He's confirming it with them for 3.5 years before he was crucified, right? He confirmed it and said, it's yours. It belongs to you. But that's really not what he did. That's not how he confirmed it, is it? That's why they were infuriated with him. He came and said, I am. He confirmed it in that he came as the covenant itself and made their participation and enjoyment of the benefits of that covenant contingent upon coming unto him. Because he was the seed to whom it all belonged. And that infuriated them. They would say, oh, he's making himself equal to God. No, he came as the covenant confirmed. He came as the seed to whom all of this pertained and in view of whom all of this was given. Remember, these offerings, they corresponded with every sacrifice Abraham made here. God didn't abrogate this. He continued it as a testimony of the covenant with the seed, because that seed was coming. And he came as that seed and said, for you to partake of this covenant, for you to have relationship with God to any degree, you must come to me. Now guess what? They had been boasting in the fact that they were the children of Abraham and they were heirs of this promise and covenant for thousands of years, assuming upon something that wasn't truly theirs, until they came to him. See, what difference does that make? It makes every bit of difference, because we're the same way. We assume upon something that doesn't belong to us. It only belongs to us if he's the one, if he's the reality of that in us. Remember, I dealt with it one time, that when he came to them and said, I will gather you, I would have gathered you, but you would not. Right? The next verses is when he goes, and we push this off into the future, but it's not. When he walks out in Matthew 23, he says that. Your house is left to you desolate. I've tried to gather you, you would not. Now your house is left to you desolate. That means your house is without its rightful occupant, me. You wouldn't receive me. So your house is now empty of its rightful occupant. You can walk in it all day. It's still empty. And the next verses is, he departs from the temple. Now, the disciples are showing Jesus how beautiful this place is. And they're saying, man, isn't it beautiful? Herod had beautified it. And they're showing, he says, not one stone will be left upon another here. Now, we know that's fulfilled, externally fulfilled, in 70 AD when all of that was destroyed. Now, he walks out of the temple. He disassociates himself with it. And he says your house is left. The word left there actually means any mutual claim that you have to this place. Any mutual claim that you have, it's a forfeiting of any claim at all. So they had a claim to the promises. They had a claim to the covenant. They had a claim to all of this. But when they refused to be gathered into him, unto him, they forfeited any claim they had to any of it. Why? Because it was all given of God to him. That's why in Matthew 11 he says, all things have been given unto me of my Father. And then he describes a relationship. No man knows, and all of that. He came and offered the covenant to these people, and they rejected it. Why? Because they wanted one of their own. They didn't want him to be their covenant. They wanted to have a covenant with God of their own. Something independent, separate from him. Because what he's offering them is not I, but Christ. He's offering them, nothing of this is mine. It all belongs to him, and the only reason I have any of it is because he is in me. That angers people because they've worked so hard for the other. They've worked so hard to prove their eligibility for God's love. They've worked so hard to say, I deserve this. But all they had done all of those years is assumed upon something that wasn't theirs. And he came and said, it belongs to me. It's all mine. If you'd come to me, you can have it. But it's never going to be separate from who I am. Covenant, promises, blessings, it's never going to be separate from who he is. We can make it. We want to make everything spiritual separate from who he is. But it's not. There's verses that say this. I mean, Paul said it. Stephen said it before he was stoned. He talked about how. Stephen. Stephen's defense before the high priest said, the glory of God appeared unto our father Abraham. All told him to get out. But here he gets into verse 8. And he gave him the covenant of circumcision, so Abraham begat Isaac, and he goes on. But what he says is, God has confirmed this covenant that he made with Abraham in the one you crucified. So they killed him. Jews killed him because he said the covenant that you're boasting in was confirmed in Christ. It's not yours separate from him, and you crucified him. You've just forfeited any benefit of covenant at all. You see, what that says to me is that it's all secured in one man, one son. And if we miss that, we miss it. If we miss that, we miss it. For the rest of our life, we're going to be assuming upon something that we don't have, instead of participating and enjoying him as everything. I don't know. This really spoke to me. It means a lot when I see how certain this is, because, like I said, for years it wasn't. When I realize that it's been eternally sure, fixed, settled before I was ever brought into it, I realize it's not dependent upon me to continue to be perfect. The grace of God is that he's offered something perfect to my soul. And I can either appreciate the gift and participate in it by God's grace, or try to assume a covenant with God because I do these things right. Try to say that basically God owes me a covenant because of the things I do. Now, it's said in different ways too. St. Luke, when Mary visits Elizabeth, and they're both with child, Mary said, my soul does magnify the Lord. My spirit hath rejoiced in God my Savior, for he hath regarded the low estate of his handmaiden. For behold, from henceforth all generations shall call me blessed. For he that is mighty hath done to me great things, holy is his name. His mercy is on them that fear him from generation to generation. He hath showed strength with his arm. He hath scattered the proud in the imagination of their hearts. He hath put down the mighty from their seats, exalted them of low degree. He hath filled the hungry with good things, and the rich he hath sent empty away. He hath hope in his servant Israel, in remembrance of his mercy, and he spake as he spake to our fathers, to Abraham, his seed forever. She's saying this, and all of this is in reference to her being with child, her being pregnant with the Messiah. All of the things she just said. He's brought the high, low, and scattered them. He's fed those who are hungry, and all of the things. That has every reference to do with her just having the Messiah in her, being pregnant with the Messiah. And she says here, this is God remembering his mercy, or fulfilling the mercy he promised to Abraham and his seed. Now, right after that, Zacharias, who was the high priest, who is the father of John the Baptist, well, Elizabeth has a child. Well, before, an angel appears to Zacharias and says, you'll call his name John, and tells him about John and all that is going to happen. And he'll be the forerunner. He will speak concerning the Messiah. And Zacharias apparently didn't believe it, because he says, you will be struck mute. You won't be able to speak because you don't believe me until all these things happen. So when she has the baby, they all ask her, so you're going to call him Zacharias Jr., right? No. Well, wait a minute. That's against the rules. His name's going to be John. No, that's against the rule. You can't name him John. Nobody in your family's been named John. So Zacharias still can't speak, and he says, give me a tablet to write on, and he writes, his name will be John. After he does that, he's able to speak. And so he begins to speak, and some people think he's speaking concerning John. He's not. He's speaking concerning Christ. He hath raised up a horn of salvation. Blessed be the Lord of Israel. He hath visited and redeemed his people. He hath raised up a horn of salvation for us in the house of his servant David. And he spake by the mouth of his holy prophets, which have been since the world began, that we should be saved from our enemies and from the hand of all that hate us, to perform the mercy promised to our fathers, to remember his covenant, the oath which he sware to Abraham. What I'm showing you, or what I'm trying to show, is that when he came to offer them what they thought they already had. And I think that's what he does with us. He comes in his coming, in my heart. He comes and offers to my soul what I thought I already had. What I thought I already possessed. Righteousness, holiness, life, peace, joy. Any of it. Relationship with God to any degree at all. I thought I had it. But you don't until he's it. That's what he offered to them. That's what he's given to us. And we can be in the same boat as they did and reject that gift of grace because we want something ourselves. When he stood in the Holy of Holies, he stood there with pure white linen when the high priest stood there, of course, type of Christ. The high priest would stand there as in the Holy of Holies before God on the Day of Atonement. He had pure white linen on. He didn't have all of the garments on. He had pure white linen. He stood there before God. And it always intrigued me why. Because when he stood there at that moment in the sight of God, he didn't really stand there for Israel. He stood there as Israel, as far as God was concerned. He stood there as Israel, and God accepted Israel. There's a verse here that, to me, and then I'll stop, says this. Now, it's not concerning the high priest, but I see it all kind of connected. And this is why they're still in Egypt, of course, in Exodus 2. It came to pass in the process of time that the king of Egypt died, and the children of Israel sighed by reason of the bondage. And they cried, and their cry came up unto God by reason of the bondage. And God heard their groaning. And God remembered his covenant with Abraham, with Isaac, and with Jacob. And he looked upon the children of Israel, and God had respect unto them, is what the King James says. Literal translation says, he looked upon them, having remembered his covenant, he looked upon them and he knew them. See, he knew them in light of a covenant. He remembered. And the word remembered is not to conjure up your memory. It means to keep ever before your face, to keep before you, always. He kept his covenant before. He kept this. He kept the seed with whom his covenant was made. He kept him before him at all times. And when he heard their groaning, he saw that son. Israel is my son. He saw that son, and he knew them in the light of that. He knew them in the light of that covenant. And what I'm saying is when the high priest would stand there, he stood there as Israel as far as God was concerned. And he knew them in him. That's what our salvation is. It's not our being known of God individually because of whatever merit we think we've, accumulated before God. He knows us in the light of covenant. He knows us in the context of covenant because he knows us in the one with whom his covenant's made, because the one who is the heir and the one who is the beneficiary of the covenant, you could say, I guess, that one, the one in whom that covenant is perfectly kept and confirmed, lives in us. And if he lives in us, the covenant is there in its absolute perfection. I was, I can't, yeah, here it is. I'll stop, but let me just read this and then we'll stop. He made coming unto him. Christ made coming unto him the contingency. Their partaking of the covenant that they had assumed upon for centuries was now contingent upon their being gathered unto the seed. And I was thinking about how we are just the same. They didn't like or accept the way he confirmed the covenant. Why? Because he declared himself as the covenant. He declared himself as the only heir. You must be found in me. You must come unto me. Nothing of this covenant can or will be experienced separate from who I am. God was not adding anything or any other party to this covenant. It was always exclusively between the Father and the Son. And for them to experience the covenant they assumed they had to be in him, so that he could be made unto them every spiritual blessing the covenant promised. So that it could truly be what Paul said, to them pertain the covenants. Well, they can't know the reality of that covenant until they know the one unto whom the covenant was made, or with whom the covenant was confirmed. You can't know any of the things that Paul talks about separate from who he is. And that's all I'm trying to say. Is a very simple point. But it's the point that I, for one, always overlooked. That our salvation truly is not I, but Christ. It really is. For the covenant to be experienced in any way, not I, but Christ must govern that reality. It must govern my heart. Or I'm going to try to intrude into something, into a place I have no right to. You can experience the perfection and the purity of this as long as you're still trying to interject you in it. You can't. You can't understand the certainty and security of this when you're still trying to interject you and me that's full of inconsistency. I mean, let's just know I am full of insecurity, insufficiency, and in a lot of junk. I was about to say some bad words. I'm full of all of that, but he's not. He's not. The covenant God has provided my soul is not full of any of those things. It's perfect. Now, again, I know, there is the knowing as we are known. There is the soul experiencing this reality. But what I'm trying to say is that until the certainty of the reality is at least understood, so we can cry out to God to know that certainty, all we're going to do is try to know God in a way contrary to his knowing of us. Try to experience something, and all we're going to do is assume that we have experienced it. Assume that we know it. Assume that we have it. So, Paul's assumptions, Paul's speculations, all of those things, they all ended in the seeing of the Son. And Galatians 3, this beautiful verse, where when he talks about the seed who has come, to whom the promise was made, it wasn't made to many but one. It says, this is verse 19 of chapter 3, why then was the law given? This is the Weymouth translation. It was imposed later for the sake of defining sin. I don't know about that as much, but until the seed should come to whom God had made the promise, and its details were laid down by a mediator with the help of angels. Verse 20. But there cannot be. Now listen to the way Weymouth says it. I like the way Weymouth says it about a mediator. There cannot be a mediator where only one individual is concerned. Now, that says everything I've said. There is no mediator in this. We want a mediation. We want mediation. We want somebody, pleading our part of the case. So there's some middleman. And we think Jesus is that. Jesus is our middleman. Yes, he's a mediator, but there is not a mediator in this covenant. He's the mediator in that he is made unto us the covenant. It's not him standing between us and God saying, God, they're really trying, and, all of the things. It's him it's the one who stands in the presence of God for us. That's the covenant. That's us. That's our covenant, is the one who stands there. That's where he says that he ever liveth to make intercession for us. It doesn't mean he's there before God pleading Rabon's case on a 24-hour basis. It means he stands there as my covenant. He stands there as my life before God. That's how he intercedes. That it is Christ who stands before in the sight of God glorified, and it's not me. That's the intercession I need. That's it. But I love this. There is no need, where the law had a mediator. In this reality, there is no mediation, because there can't be a mediator where only one remains. That's beyond words beautiful. There cannot be a mediator where there is only one individual left. Only one lives, and the covenant is secured in the presence of that one. And until my soul beholds the one who is the one who remains, I will desire mediation. But it's established with one, confirmed in one, and that one lives in me. Mediation is not needed or permitted here. Revelation is needed. God revealing his Son. Why does it say he revealed his Son and not he revealed Jesus? He revealed Christ. Because there is a covenant, a relationship. There's an inheritance involved in that Paul assumed upon during his time as a Jew. But in the seeing of the Son to whom it all belonged, he can now describe to them it's always been made with a seed, one. Not seeds as of many. And he used to be part of the many that claimed it. He sees the one. And I'm taken back in and we'll shut up this time. But I promise. And I'm taken back in that time of Korah, where he swallows them up, and just like we are, they keep on. They keep on. Well, you killed the prophets of God. So God said, okay, do it again. He does something else, and then there's this plague starts in the midst, and here's Aaron has to run through the midst of them, and it says he stands there with his censer in his hand, and he stands between the living and the dead. But they don't stop there either. Just keeps on going. God is going to consistently show and demonstrate only one will stand before me. And that was the whole point. God's continually stressing that point. So the next thing he does is, they're still murmuring and complaining, and he says, take these sticks, write the names of the tribes on them, and then take one and write Aaron's name on it, and put it in the holy place, and then, I think it was the next morning, come back in. And the next morning, one stick, and it was Aaron's rod, was blooming. And it not only was blooming, it was bearing fruit. Meaning that it lived. It was the resurrection. The one who lives before him and bears fruit unto him is one. Aaron, not the many. They didn't bear anything. So what he says is, you take this stick, you take this rod that's blooming and blossoming almonds, and you take it out to them and you show this to them. And when they see this, it says their murmuring will cease. And that's all I'm saying. When we see the one that God sees, when we behold the one that lives in his sight and is the fruit that pleases him, our murmuring, our complaining, and our desire to bear fruit unto him of some other sort will cease. Everything for us is answered in the seeing of this covenant, in the seeing of the one, the seed to whom it's belonging. It's all answered right there. That's our need. Father, thank you for this time. Thank you for the grace that has offered to our soul a perfect covenant, a confirmed covenant. In the person of your Son, do not permit us to mar that by attempting to bring ourselves into the picture. Let our souls behold the perfect one, the one unto whom you look, the one in whom your heart is forever pleased and delighted. And let our souls be constrained unto him forever, and live in the confidence and the certainty that he has made unto us everything we have assumed we had, or could obtain, or could bring about by whatever means. Reveal your Son. Amen. All right, we'll stop there.